everybody. We wanted to cover a little content around some cordless clippers today. I want to talk a little bit about Andis's Pulse ZR II. This is an area of maintenance that I'm going to get to that it's hidden. It's something that you don't just see on the outside of the tool, but you may suffer symptoms. So one of the areas that I'm talking about has to do with when we turn the switch on. Now this tool had an issue when it was first released, where when we pushed the switch button, internally the momentary switch wouldn't get activated properly. And it didn't always happen, but it was a common thread with this tool. And so oh gosh, it's been a couple years ago now, Andis pulled this back off the market, and they engineeringly changed how that switch was designed, and they fixed that issue. But with everything, there's still going to be some strengths and weaknesses to what it's going to do. And so what I want to look at a little bit first, I'm going to take the drive cover off. And one of the maintenance areas of this tool that we can first see has to do with this blade drive. This is the Andis blade drive, which is common to all their detachable blade clippers. So if you have any of the detachable blade clippers, we're going to use the exact same part right here. And so this is what actually creates the stroke when we turn the clipper on. And when we turn it on, it's going to stroke back and forth. Even when I slow it down, you don't really see it moving. But that component, now over time, as you use this, a couple things happen in wear. One, the little throat area where the bearing is moving it back and forth will start to get wallered out or worn wider in its placement. With that, you're going to start getting some noise, along with the idea that you're going to reduce stroke, because that space that it's creating reduces how far it will move the drive each time it goes around. The other is the drive tip itself, right up in here. And this one even you can see where there's some slight wear already starting on this drive. And what happens with that, of course, is that as that gets narrower, again, when it comes into the throat of the blade, can't move it as far, also reducing stroke. The bigger issue that we will find on a worn drive, and this one's in pretty good shape when it comes to its overall wear, but you can see it a little bit. I'll try to hold still, and then I'm going to put some pressure against the drive tip. Now if you see how the webbing down in this area starts to collapse as I put pressure against it. That's similar to the blade putting pressure against the drive. As that weakens over time, it reduces stroke. So one more major area that this will start to fail. Now notice it's all still intact. There's nothing broken. There aren't any pieces separated. And when we get to that point, we know we've got an overly worn drive. In a grooming shop, and I'm going to be on the conservative side, and let's say a full-time groomer works with this tool in that 8 to 10 dogs a day. And I know that's a low number for a lot of groomers. But if we're just 8 to 10 dogs a day, we want to see replacing this part every 30 days. If you have a lot of heavily matted dogs coming in and you're really putting a lot of load and stress to the drive, you might want to change it more often. Again, can't stress enough how much this affects what we're going to call the feed rate when it comes to grooming. So feed rate is how quickly we can take our hand with the clipper through the coat to leave a smooth result, and how many times we have to pass over that same area to get that smooth result. So the blade drive is one of the major components that's going to affect that. Another side of it, as a sharpener, we also know that the sharpening work we do on a fresh blade, or even the brand new blades coming in the factory, they're going to look like they're dull. They're going to look as though they're not performing correctly due to the drive. So again, it's a 30-day replacement component. All right, we've covered that one. Underneath that, if you're changing your drive, a preventative maintenance piece you can do for yourself is to check the eccentric bearing. So this silver bearing that's right in here, and that's the part, again, that's going to move the drive back and forth right in here. When you have the drive out, and we're going to do that, we'll take the drive out. And that's simply by taking the two number 1 Phillips screws out from the drive. And then we're going to just take our screwdriver a little bit to help us lift it out. Get it underneath here of its hole. Once we get it kind of released, we'll slide it out of the way. One of the things then that we can check when we have this apart is the roll of this bearing. And I'm just going to take my finger and see how smooth it rolls. If it has roughness to it, kind of like you're on a gravel road, that would tell us that the round bearings aren't round anymore, and that's going to soon fail. If we notice the outside collar having a lot of play side to side, back and forth, there again, that's a sign that it's about ready to fail, and we can try to get service on that before it goes ahead and leaves us without a tool to use. Now, in the case of these, there are a couple fixes. If your repair station or ourselves have a replacement bearing itself, we can change those bearings. The bigger repair out of the factory is that you would have to change the entire motor to replace that bearing. So we have come up with a bearing that we can replace separately, makes that repair much more cost effective. While we're here, let's go ahead and look at the hinge on the other side of the tool. Now the hinge itself, that's what the blade is going to slide onto. And when we snap that down without a blade on it, we can start checking the strength of this hinge. Now if I get my hand in here and I try to pull up at that with my fingernail, and if I cannot move it, that's telling us it's in good service condition. If I'm able to move it at all with my nail to start to lift it, it's going to be too weak. A big part of the job of this hinge is to keep the blade engaged to the drive. So if it can start having movement upward, we're going to start affecting even the life of the drive because we're going to be tearing at the tip. So in order to raise that back up again, I need my screwdriver to get that popped up. Another piece that's kind of hard to see because it's so small, but is the hook of the latch mechanism. So that's a spring-loaded assembly that's part of the hinge that catches the socket of the blade. So when the blade hinges down, the latch engages, and that helps keep that all locked together. But again, if this tongue is weak, the spring has gotten weak underneath it. Even though it hooks here, it allows the entire blade to pivot in the space that it has. So we want to make sure we check that every once in a while to make sure that's not affecting, again, the service of the blade. Now, this is a battery tool, so that's a little different. We covered this in another video content just here recently, was clipper maintenance, and then in parentheses, cordless. And so we're going to talk a lot about what it is and why it is to maintain the blades on this clipper and what that does to affect the battery and the motor life. But I'm going to go ahead, and one of the little hidden features, if you haven't seen this, on the bottom of the tool is a little button and a light. So when I push that, and this one comes on green, this one also is coming on green. When the battery is getting low in its charge life, this will turn red. And it's just a warning that if you haven't had it on the charger recently, you can check to see if it's okay to go ahead and groom, or if we need to go ahead and put it back on the charger for a little while. So that's just a feature that's built into the battery itself. I have a little button release right here that I popped to take the battery out of the way. I'm going to set it off to the side. And I want to go ahead and look again. We're going to go back to this switch mechanism. Now remember, this was the on-off switch. The one here on the face is the speed control. And you will have a series of lights. I'll put that back for just a second. That come on, an LED light, and it will move brighter up the scale as you go with the 5 different speeds. So that's just where you can see that. Also, as the battery life starts to die, while you're using the tool, this will start to turn yellow and then red, indicating that, whoa, we better get this charged. All right, now, if we look at the switch itself, and I'm going to go ahead and remove some fasteners so that we can look at this more directly. We'll pull the 4 screws out that hold the housing on here. We'll take those out, and then what I really needed to do was come back here in the back and remove the 2 short screws. If all you're trying to do is access the switch and circuit board, I only had to take out these 2 short screws. But we have others up here in the front It looks like this tool, one of the screws is stripped a little bit, but it did come out. Get that out of the way. So we've got all our screws out now. That's going to remove the back cover, exposes the motor. Not a lot to see there, but on this front side, this is going to be more important. I'm going to get my fingernails underneath the cover, and then it just pops forward. We'll lay that aside. So here's our internal circuit board. Now, there's two momentary switches here that work with our speed control. So if you kind of look at the positioning, here's our speed control as we push it forward or back to raise or lower. All it's doing is pushing against these momentary switches on the board. Then on the side over here is our actual on-off switch. So it has an actuator right here that comes across. And the older design of this relied on the housing to have a space between the actuator, the housing, and the momentary switch. And that's where the variable came in, why they didn't work as well. Because as you slid this forward and back, that space, if it grew, in other words, if the housing kind of shifted over a little bit, it wouldn't depress the button all the way. So the new design wraps all the way around the momentary switch as it lays in here so that it can stay consistent as it pushes in that switch. And again, if I bring this up, we can see this little white button is all that it is to go clicks on and off to turn our clipper into power it or to shut it off. One of the things that we find that happens just in general use, this isn't anything we've done destructive or abnormal, but hair and dander the little tiny particles will continue to filter around different seals and whatnot and around the housing and get inside. So one of the areas that they will collect in is right here around the actuator itself, which has a trapped area that it slides in. If too much of that dander builds up or that spent fur, it no longer can move. If we can't move all the way into the full on position, we can't turn the tool on anymore and we think it's broken. Well, it's all it is really is fur. So the other is that up around this trapped area, it's a full U-shaped area right here. We again can get dander and fur built up inside, limiting the stroke or how far it can move forward and backward. So if that's the case, that will stop us from working. Now, another area that within the same system is that hair and dander will get down inside around the plastic and the momentary switch itself. And what we'll have there is intermittent on and off. A lot of times we'll get to the point that they just won't turn on anymore. We will take some high pressure air and blow that out to remove that dust and dander from inside the switch that's now being controlled instead of just freely working. So if we get that out, many times we won't have to replace the circuit board. If the repair has gone beyond that, if it's in there long enough to where it's starting to burn the contacts, we're going to have to replace that entire circuit board. So it is a doable thing, and it's really economically advantage driven to say that I would still go ahead and do that. This is nearly a $500 tool, so some of these internal parts, to replace them, it's still a value. Remember, Andis tools all have a 1-year warranty. So if you're falling within that 1 year, you can send those back to the factory and get those updated and repaired. And so that's just something you always have to remember about it. Other than that, the only other component that we really haven't covered is the motor itself. Motors will fail. They're put under a lot of stress and load with the type of work that groomers do, because we all know how much work grooming is. It is a physical job. And so those motors eventually are going to fail. Most likely it's an electronic failure, internal shorts and armatures going ahead and losing contact internally. So if that's the case, that can also be replaced. Housing components are available and can be replaced as well. That is the majority of the tool itself. I just really wanted to think through a little hidden gem is that switch itself and how the dust and dander affect it. So I hope this has been a helpful and encouraging talk. If there's other things that you guys would like to learn about, please tell us in the comments, or if there's other questions even around this tool, leave your comments in our comment section. Thank you all for listening.